Chapter 4 Twin Swords of Slashing Death 1. They spent one night on the road back to Kugane and one night in the village, and then they left for E-Rantel early in the morning to complete their 2-night, 3-day itinerary. When they arrived, the city was just beginning to put on its evening face. On the main street, continual light lamps threw white glows, and the people walking were gradually changing to a different sort. Young women and children were gone. Most of the pedestrians were men on their way home from work. Lively voices and warm light spilled out of the establishments lining either side of the street. Ainz took it all in. It didn't seem like the city had changed in the 2 days he'd been gone. Well, he'd left for Kugane the day after he arrived, so he didn't have the knowledge of or fondness for it to be able to tell. Even so, he felt that there was nothing different about the peaceful cityscape. One road behind the main street, the party halted for a moment. They would surely have been in the way, stopping in the middle of the street, but there was no one close enough to complain. That is to say, people were steering clear of them. Ainz peered at them feebly, with his back rounded. Almost everyone going by stared at them. No, they stared directly at Ainz and whispered to one another. He could hear them, and he felt like everyone was having a laugh at his expense, but that was just his paranoia. Actually, they were all speaking highly of him, expressing their surprise and fear. But that didn't quite assuage his paranoia. Ainz looked down at the pearl-white hair. Yes, he was mounted atop the wise king of the forest. All the passers-by were amazed at the majestic, though Ainz had his doubts on that point, wise king of the forest, and saying things like, "My, what a noble magical beast that warrior is riding!" Ainz pondered if he should be proud. He knew he should. Everyone was saying what a splendid magical beast the wise king of the forest was. But Ainz felt like he was on some kind of sketchy game show. The closest thing he could think of was if an older dude was riding a merry-go-round with no girlfriend or family, looking straight ahead and deadly serious. Knowing how to ride a horse was no help at all. The hamster's shape was entirely different, so Ainz had his butt stuck out and his legs spread wide. If he didn't assume perfect gymnastics vaulting form, he couldn't keep his balance. Obviously, it hadn't been his idea to ride the monster. The Swords of Darkness and the wise king of the forest herself had suggested it, and then Narwhal chimed in that a ruler shouldn't have to walk, so he found himself thinking it might not be that bad. How wrong he was. "I shouldn't have gone along with this. It's like someone set a trap for me." Riding a hamster was like something out of a fairy tale, which would have been fine if he'd been a little kid. Or maybe a woman, but that was a stretch. It certainly didn't suit a robust warrior in full plate armor, but everyone said he was the weird one for thinking that. Is my sense of aesthetics off or theirs? Maybe the whole world's? Needless to say, the answer was clear. If the majority of people said something was beautiful, and Ainz felt otherwise, then it had to be Ainz's sense of aesthetics that had gone haywire. That was why he couldn't put up a proper resistance to the idea of riding the wise king of the forest, especially if doing it would distinguish him and help Momon the adventurer carve out a sturdy position in the social order of this world. Still, why the humiliation play? His mind would suppress any emotion wave of a certain strength, but there wasn't any sign of that happening. In other words, he wasn't feeling too humiliated. A fact that taught him something about himself. If I have a high tolerance for shame, that means... Could I be a brilliant masochist? I always thought I was more of a sadist, but... Well, we made it back to the city, so the request is fulfilled. Peter and Inferior were talking, oblivious to Ainz as he agonized over his kinks while comparing his current mental state to the videos and images of that persuasion he had collected. Yes, you're right. Request complete. So, the agreed-upon reward has already been arranged, but I'd like to give you the extra reward I mentioned in the forest, so could you come with me to my shop? Behind Inferior, the cart was crammed full of medicinal herbs. Not only that, but there was also tree bark, strange fruits that had been hanging from the branches of the tree, mushrooms that seemed bigger than Inferia's arms could get around, and long grasses, i.e., a whole bunch of miscellaneous loot. For someone not in the know, it looked like just a pile of plants, but for someone with the right knowledge, it was a sparkling mountain of treasure. The reason they'd made such a haul was that the wise king of the forest, at Ainz's command, had escorted them around her territory so they could gather things safely. In return for the extremely rare herbs and other useful potion ingredients, Inferia had promised them all a handsome bonus on top of the original reward.
Okay, Momon, you're off to the Adventurers Guild, right?
Oh, right. Any magical beast in the city needs to be registered at the guild, huh?
It's a pain, but that's how it is.
What's the plan? We defeated those ogres, so should we all go and collect for that too?
No. Momon held our hands through every step of this trip. Let's go to Inferia's place and at least help him unload the herbs and whatnot. If we don't do some work, I'd feel bad taking an equal share of the reward.
The Swords of Darkness nodded in agreement, but Inferia tried to politely decline.
Oh, you don't need to.
Well, there's the extra reward you promised us, too, so just consider it a favor.
Peter was so casual about it that Inferia gave in to their kindness.
Okay then, I'll give you guys a discount when you buy potions at my shop.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, Momon will go to Inferia's after he swings by the guild, and the rest of us will go straight to Inferia's, help out with odds and ends, and then head to the guild to settle up. We'll apply for the ogre compensation, and then we can pick up the reward tomorrow. So I'm sorry to trouble you, but do you think you could meet us at the guild again tomorrow? Around the same time as when we first met?
Sure thing. That was just what Ainz wanted to hear. He'd managed to nonchalantly ask how beast registration worked, but he was glad to be able to avoid the situation of having to ask them to read or write for him if they had come. There was a chance that something like that would make all his efforts so far come to nothing.
Okay, see you later then.
With a shallow bow of his head, Ainz, still riding the wise king of the forest, accompanied by Narbrul, took leave of the Swords of Darkness and proceeded to the guild. Once they were far enough away, Narbrul sidled up to him and asked with some suspicion in her voice,
"Are you sure it's okay to trust them like that?"
I'm fine with it. Even if they betrayed us, all we'd lose is the reward for the ogres. I imagine we'd lose a lot more if we obsessed about such a small sum, and gave the impression we were greedy.
Ainz had come to the city to get famous. Having a reputation as petty would be a huge hurdle to his plans.
A warrior may not be able to eat, but he'll still pick his teeth.
Remembering that saying, Ainz put a hand in his pocket and fingered the small pouch containing his change. It was as flat as a pancake, and he couldn't feel much of anything hard inside, so it was depressingly easy to tell how little it contained. It was still somehow enough to get 2 people a room for the night. If paying for food had been necessary, they would have come up short, but since Ainz was undead and Narbrul wore a ring that made eating and drinking unnecessary for her, they were able to save quite a bit of money. The idea behind having one of her 2 rings be something so boring was to take precaution against poison, but it ended up coming in handy in this unexpected way. But this thing eats, Ainz was thinking, looking down at the wise king of the forest, when Narbrul continued their conversation.
It would be strange for a supreme being such as yourself to cling to such a paltry sum. Please excuse my lack of thought, Lord Ainz.
Ainz grunted a response and fingered the pouch again. His spine wasn't breaking into a cold sweat, but he sure felt like it was.
Why am I making things harder than they need to be? And again with the Lord Ainz.
Well, whatever. Narbrul, it's fine. As long as nobody is listening, I don't care. As Ainz was inwardly slumping, Narbrul chattered on cheerfully.
Oh yeah, those crane flies were bowing down before your awesome power, my lord.
I hardly think they were bowing down.
So modest, Lord Ines. I'm sure that ogres and the like are below worms in your eyes, but you still put on a display of first-class swordsmanship for us. I was impressed.
Ines could feel the wise king of the forest trembling strangely beneath him. Ignoring that, he said,
That, I was just swinging it around.
One-hit kill made him sound good, but he really wasn't. The motions of Gazef in the battle he'd witnessed earlier had a flow to them. Meanwhile, when Ines thought back on his motions, they were as lame as a kid recklessly swinging around a sword. Everyone's praise was only due to the overpowering destructive power that stemmed from his extraordinary physical power. His technique was nothing compared to that of a real warrior like Gazef Stronov.
Not that I expected I'd be able to move like an actual warrior.
So why not use magic to become a warrior?
Wearing armor, Ines was capable of using 5 spells. One of them would take his level as a caster and make that exact number his warrior level. In other words, Ines could temporarily become a level 100 warrior. There were pros to this, like being able to use gear that only certain classes could use, but naturally there were also big cons. For starters, during that time he wouldn't be able to use any magic. Also, while he would become a warrior, he wouldn't acquire all the warrior's skills, and the recalculation of his ability points would place him lower than a warrior who had been one from the beginning. Essentially, he'd be transformed into a half-assed warrior. Maybe he'd be able to defeat a priest knight, or other quasi-warrior class in a sword fight, but against someone who'd collected pure warrior classes, it was doubtful. Still, he'd be far stronger than he was right now. The problem was,
there are too many drawbacks. If I was suddenly assaulted by another warrior and couldn't use any magic for even a short amount of time, I would undoubtedly be defeated. Even if I could use a scroll and cast a spell that way, considering the amount of prep that takes, I'd be at too big of a disadvantage.
At the present time, when they didn't know if there were enemy players out there, he couldn't let his guard down. There was no point in going to the trouble to use that magic just to give himself a weak point.
Well, this warrior thing is just an act to hide who I really am, so it's probably not worth getting so upset about.
The wise king of the forest jumped with a gasp and turned to look up at Ines.
I've been listening to your conversation. You're not really a warrior?
Ines looked her in her black eyes and answered in the negative with a confident shake of his head. Narbrel explained, her voice oozing superiority.
Lord Ines is just pretending to be a warrior. It's like a game. If he were to use his true power, he would rend the heavens and split the earth.
Faced with her absolute faith, her belief that him being capable of so much was a given, Ines couldn't get himself to say, no, that would never happen.
Yeah, pretty much. You're lucky you didn't have to fight me for real, wise king of the forest. If you had, you probably wouldn't have survived more than a second.
Is that so, Master? I, Hamusuke, will be even more loyal to you.
Hamusuke. That was the first thing that had popped into Ines' mind when the wise king of the forest asked him for a name. He'd given it to her that very moment, and the wise king of the forest was happy with it, but he realized it was totally lame. Yeah, Hamusuke was a hasty decision. Cream Puff, that would have been more witty. Even all my old guildmates used to tell me I had no sense for names. So it was that Ines, full of regret, trundled along to the Adventurers' Guild atop the wise king of the forest, also known as Hamusuke. Inferia pulled the cart around to the rear of the house and parked right outside the back entrance. He hopped out of the driver's box carrying a lantern lit with magic, and then unlocked and opened the door. He banished the darkness of the room inside by hanging the lantern on the wall. Several barrels appeared in its glow. The smell of dried herbs coming from them indicated that this room was used to store medicinal herbs.
Okay then, sorry to trouble you, but do you mind carrying in the herbs?
The Swords of Darkness gave a willing reply and carefully took the bundles of herbs off the cart and put them in the storage area. As Inferior gave directions on where to deposit each item, he had a strange feeling.
Grandma must not be here.
She was getting on in years, but her eyes and ears were still sharp, so she should have heard them clattering around and come in to greet them. That said, when she was focused on making potions, she didn't let little noises interrupt her. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so he didn't raise his voice to call her or anything. It wasn't long before all the bundles of herbs had been put in the appropriate places. The Swords of Darkness were looking a little out of breath.
You must be tired. There should be some cold fruit water in the main building. Would you like some before you leave?
Sounds great, said Lacroute happily. A few beads of sweat stood out on his forehead. The other Swords of Darkness nodded their agreement.
Right this way, then.
Just as Inferior turned to lead them to the main building, the door across the room opened.
There you are. Welcome home.
Standing there was a cute woman, but there was something troubling about her. Her short golden hair swung with each step she took.
I was so worried about you. Because you were just gone. What a horrible timing you have. I've been waiting this whole time, wondering when you'd get back. Who might you be?
Huh? You don't know her?
Peter yelped, surprised they weren't on at least acquaintance terms, given the woman's familiar tone of voice.
I'm here to kidnap you. I want you to use the spell Undead Army to summon a legion of zombies. So come be my pawn. Pretty please?
Sensing the malicious mood, the Swords of Darkness immediately drew their weapons. She kept talking even as they all assumed fighting stances.
A 7th tier spell. Tricky for a plain old person to use, but doable with a crown of wisdom. Furthermore, though it's impossible to control all the undead that are summoned with it, they can be led. Perfect plan, don't you think? Awesome, right?
Inferior, get back! Get away from here!
Said Peter in a hard voice, focused on the woman with his sword at the ready.
The reason she's rambling on and on is that she's 100% certain she can kill us. So as long as you're her aim, the only thing that can change the current situation is you running away.
When Inferior panicked and fell back, the Swords of Darkness formed a wall in front of him.
Ninja, you should also fall back!
Dine shouted, and then Lacroute spoke up as well.
Take the kid and run for it! You have something you need to do! It doesn't seem like we'll be able to help you, but we can at least buy you some time. But... Oh, your story's a real tearjerker, huh? You're gonna make me cry, yep. But I can't have you running away on me. I want to play with at least one of you.
She laughed delightedly at Ninja as he bit his lip in hesitation and slowly pulled a stiletto out from under her robe. As if timed for that moment, the door on the other side of the room opened, and a man like a sickly, pale, bony undead appeared. The Swords of Darkness's faces turned grim when they realized they were caught in a pincer.
You've played enough.
Aw, what do you mean, Cash? You made it so no one outside will hear their screams, right? Can I play with at least one?
Her toothy grin sent chills up Inferior's spine.
Well, there's nowhere to run now. So let's get to it, shall we?